South Africa wanted to curb illegal migration. Now the crackdown has spilled into a wider African dispute, straining relations with neighbors and putting Pan-African unity under pressure. South Africa's Home Affairs Department has written to Malawi and to the embassies of Nigeria and Ethiopia, requesting reimbursement for the repatriation and deportation operation. The bill, 292 million rand, roughly $18.5 million. That is almost 5 times Pretoria's original budget of about $3.8 million. Home Affairs says the money went toward transport, a temporary repatriation center in Musina, and overtime for government staff. As of the 6th of August, more than 82,000 foreign nationals had been processed through repatriation and deportation channels.
All right, welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we talk about all things Africa news. South Africa demands $18 million from Nigeria, Malawi, and Ethiopia for deportations. Ghana has a response. There's a Sahel block on Niger signing a $1.9 billion oil refinery deal. We'll talk about Russia's air bridges to the Sahel, how Moscow transports troops and military aid. We'll also talk about Traore turning to Putin as Russia expands economic ties in Burkina Faso. We also have a story about a Nigerian man debating some UK folks about recolonization of the continent and specifically Nigeria. We'll talk a little bit, if we have time, about Egypt and Ethiopia and the Cairo issues, the warning about the Nile dams. And if we have time, we'll talk about the fact that Angelique Kidjo makes history as the first African artist to receive a star on a Hollywood Walk of Fame. There's some other stories from around Africa having to do with Nigeria and Trump, Kenya and Tanzania, Zambia election, and Senegal tightening asset disclosures. But before we get into today's stories, let's do some intros. So I'll turn it over to our co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. I am Gloria Ayo, host, founder of Diaspora Station, and co-host of This Week in Africa with Joe Hatagwa. And on Diaspora Station, what we do is we try to unite Africa and its diaspora through history, culture, news, you name it. You should absolutely check us out. But as always, pleasure to be back.
Absolutely. And I'm Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African Media. We help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. We also are following my story on buying land, building. I recently started the process of purchasing an acre of land. And so we are following that journey. People who sign up for our subscription service will get access to see more about that. If you're interested, you just go to home.authenticafrican.com. Again, home.authenticafrican.com. Fill out the form there and we'll take you on our journey. So with that, we'll get into today's stories. As mentioned, South Africa seeks reimbursement from Nigeria, Malawi, and Ethiopia for the deportations that happened. Nearly 80,000 people have been deported from South Africa to other countries of origin. Nigeria, as part of this process, had accused South Africa of failing to protect legally documented Nigerians targeted in the xenophobic attacks, while Ghana obviously had raised concerns with the African Union over violence against its citizens and damage to Ghanaian-owned businesses. So we'll give you guys the Ghanaian response in just a moment. I'll play a little bit more from this video from First Post Africa to give you a little bit more insight into the story of this reparations, I guess, or this reimbursement request from South Africa. And then we will have some commentary on the other side. Okay, here we go.
And now South Africa says it shouldn't have to carry the weight of the deportation costs alone.
So to date, this is what we've spent. 292 million rand. We have written to the government of Malawi and the embassies of Nigeria and Ethiopia requesting a reimbursement of this cost through the Department of DIRCO, and we are anticipating responses from those governments.
But the money is only the start. The crackdown has unfolded alongside a surge in anti-migrant protests and violence against foreign nationals. That has put African governments under pressure to protect their citizens and confront Pretoria. Nigeria has been among the most vocal. Abuja says some Nigerians targeted in the violence were legally documented. Nigeria has also helped to evacuate more than 1,500 of its citizens.
This xenophobic attack had gone beyond, attack on criminals. We have record of Nigerians who have legitimate papers to remain in South Africa, yet they have been attacked. And we could see some mob actions, which we saw the police watching as if they are helpless to address this situation, which to us raises issues of state responsibility. It raises the issues of complicity.
And the diplomatic pressure is not coming from Nigeria alone. Ghana has taken the issue to the African Union, saying repeated attacks on African nationals threatens African unity.
So we'll leave it there for now. Gloria, your thoughts on South Africa asking for reimbursement for the costs for deportation of what they said were illegal migrants from their end?
Yeah, so the Home Affairs Minister actually called the costs unforeseen and unavoidable. And the word unforeseen was so confusing to me because the anti-immigrant marches were publicly announced. We all heard it, we all saw it. The announcement came out weeks in advance. The June 30 deadline was publicized for over a month before it even arrived. And here I kept, on this show, on my platform, I kept saying, listen, at this point, if you can leave, leave, right? Because we didn't know what would happen on June 30. The government had intelligence about the scale of the planned march. And at some point, it actually even deployed the national defense ahead of the deadline. So they were well aware of what was happening. And to watch all of this unfold and then you're characterizing it as unforeseen is very confusing to me. I'm not able to reconcile that with the documented timeline that was given, that we all heard about, that we all spoke about. So what this shows, the government now coming out asking for goodness, it's really sad. The government coming out now asking for reimbursement based on what they decided to do shows that they're actually more of a passive responder to events. The government of South Africa is not proactive enough, which is clearly what has led to the escalations that we're even seeing now, because there had to have been some sort of buildup leading to what we have going on now. And it's basically like you waited until everything really got out of hand. And now you're going to go back to these countries and say, oh, by the way, you owe us money. Now you're sending invoices to different countries. South Africa made a sovereign policy decision to conduct mass deportations. The decision to depart, when to depart, how to depart, under what conditions that people needed to depart, was entirely within South African sovereign authority. So you used your own law enforcement, you used your own military, your own home affairs infrastructure, your own transport resources to carry out these operations. And then you make the decision and suddenly you're asking countries to come take care of the bill based on citizens that you expelled. Some article in Zambia, they actually said this is the equivalent of forcefully throwing a guest out of your house, and then you're handing them an invoice for the wear and tear on your front door. I thought that was so brilliant. And there's a cost because South Africa conducted the operations. The operations, as was mentioned, other countries had to pay money, spend money to repatriate their citizens or get their citizens back to their countries. And all this happened because South Africa chose to expel them. And some left voluntarily, we need to make that very clear. But if you're choosing now to conduct these deportations, sending the bill to these countries is actually quite ridiculous. I've never heard of this happening. because now you're positioning yourself as the victim of the financial burden based on what you chose to do, rather than as the one whose policy choices actually produce the crisis that we're all dealing with today.
Absolutely. And before I give my commentary, I will say, for those of you who are watching, definitely let us know in the comments and with this poll, do you think Nigeria, Malawi, and Ethiopia should pay South Africa for deportations? 1 yes, 2 no, 3 other. Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear from you all and get your thoughts. Now, as far as my thoughts on this, I think number one, this was a self-imposed deadline, and it was imposed by the people. Those who were protesting actually gave the June 30th deadline, and the government of South Africa themselves, they rejected this deadline. They explicitly rejected, dismissed the deadline as fake, unauthorized, emphasizing private citizens have no legal authority to issue removal orders or enforce immigration law. However, they proceeded to operate nonetheless with these deportations from a government level. And so, unforeseen, as Gloria said, I think is very difficult to back, because there was a deadline that they're all operating towards. Now, maybe looking at the potential for it being unexpected in terms of the cost, that may be a different conversation. And so, sure, but at the end of the day, you know, the problem, as you said, that started in your home, you cannot ask someone else to pay for. If you feel like you wanted to remove all these people en masse in this time frame, which required so many resources, then it is on you to have budgeted and or figured out how to deal with that resource constraint. Because this was an artificial deadline. This was not a coordinated effort. It was an imposed deadline. But what I will say, though, is it shows that protests in South Africa can have an impact on the government if you choose to protest the right things and focus on certain things. In this case, obviously, you know, I'm of two minds on this one, because at the end of the day, you know, every country has its own rules and laws. And I always say, if you're moving to a country, you have to follow their rules and laws, whether you believe that they make sense or not. You just kind of have to. But also at the same time, you know, this is self-imposed. South Africa decided to do these deportations, and so now they have to deal with it and pay the bill. So yeah, let us know in the comments what you guys think, if Nigeria, Malawi, or Ethiopia should pay. Want to hear from you all. I'm going to remove the poll from the screen, but wanted to make sure that you guys had the opportunity to respond to it. So no matter when you start watching this live stream, if you watch a little later, please feel free to let us know in the comments. All right, so next, I do want to take you to the Foreign Minister of Ghana and his reply to this. Obviously, Ghana wasn't on the list of countries, and Ghana has also gone to the AU, as mentioned in this video. So we're going to play a little bit from Ghanaian Foreign Minister and hear from him as to how he feels about what is going on with this the reimbursement request.
South Africa for the evacuation of its nationals, after reports emerged that the South African government is seeking about $18 million from several African countries for support provided during the repatriation of nationals. Now, in a press statement issued on Thursday, August 13, 2026, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that Ghana independently financed the evacuation of its citizens following recent xenophobic attack in South Africa.
All right, so simple. Ghana independently financed its own evacuation, so they're saying we don't need to pay, which is why they weren't on that list. Any thoughts about that in terms of how Ghana did it themselves, and which is probably why they're not on this list?
Yeah, Ghana is just, I'm really impressed. You know, obviously it's not everything Mahama's government has done that we agree with, but there are just certain things they do that I find to be really remarkable. They set the pace. If you notice, they actually, and that's why when people say Mahama is like the big brother to the AES, I mean, that's another way he's known. You know, he's been proactive with diplomatic relations, etc. But you can also see the government being very conscious of ensuring that the dignity of Ghanaians are being protected. So they go ahead, they step steps ahead of, I hate to say, certain governments on the continent. But there are certain things they do that I do like, and this is one of them. Just see how proactive they are with taking care of everything. And I was shocked that they were not even they were not on the list of those who were receiving an invoice. But again, it speaks to just how proactive the Ghanaian government has been. So shout out to them.
Yeah, and the fact that they financed it themselves, probably in anticipation of something like this.
Yes.
You know, one of the things we have to understand is these African governments have cash on hand. You saw that Mahama paid outright the full debt for electricity in cash, one fell swoop, or at least in a couple of small payments, but it was paid for quickly. They've paid all their debt back to IMF, et cetera, early or on time. And now they self-finance the repatriation of their citizens from South Africa. And so you could see that, you know, those are all things that we would want to see other African governments doing. And so that is, I think, the thing that people are applauding Ghana for. So quickly, we want to move on to the Sahel, where there are a lot of things happening, and we want to kind of make sure that you guys are all aware. Number one, the fact that Niger signed a $1.9 billion oil refinery deal and drilling deal, with a company called Zimar based in Canada. Their goal is to build 100,000 barrel per day oil refinery, which is a little under half of what is being done in the Dangote refinery in Nigeria. But why this matters is because right now it's mostly crude oil, which gets refined by European or American or other foreign nationals and sold back to Africa at market rates, right? You get involved in the production, you reduce your exposure on cost in the end and increase your power. And so now you can export refined oil to other countries who need it, considering what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz. So with that, let's play a video from First Post where they describe this more in detail, and we will have some commentary on the other side.
Our next story is also from one of the West African Sahel states. This time, the focus is on Niger. Over the last few days, the nation has made two major moves toward expanding its oil industry. First, drilling commenced at Niger's Kafra oil well. And second, the country signed a $1.9 billion agreement to develop an oil refinery. The move shows that Niger is planning to become a major player in petrochemicals. Let's take a look at these moves one at a time. Now, starting with the Kafra oil well. The well is located in northern Niger, about 85 kilometers from the country's border with Algeria. The location is one of the reasons why Algeria has been interested in the well. In fact, the company carrying out the drilling is Algeria's state-owned oil firm, Sonatrach. Now, the Algerian state oil firm had obtained a prospecting license for the Kafra oil block back in 2005. It explored the block and discovered oil there years ago. Now, the block is expected to hold over 260 million barrels of oil reserves. In 2022, Niger and Sonatrach renewed their agreement, and it was also a production sharing deal. But the following year brought instability. Niger saw a coup, and it has taken a while for the situation in the country to stabilize. It seems the Algerian state company now believes that calm has returned to Niger, which is what could explain why Sonatrach has finally begun its drilling operations. Algeria is also deepening its role in Niger's energy sector. Sonatrach is now working alongside Niger's in the oil sectors of both nations. And even more things are in the pipeline, including a literal pipeline. Niger and Algeria are cooperating on the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline project. It will extend from Nigeria to Algeria through Niger. Niamey is reportedly cooperating with Algiers to get the pipeline constructed. So,
all right, we'll leave it there because there's a lot of information here and it's quite a long video. If you guys want, you can check it out. So your thoughts on Niger and this $1.9 billion oil refinery and the fact that they started drilling as well?
Yeah, for decades, well, over a century, really, France has extracted the dominant share of resources on Nigerian soil through what they claimed were partnerships, but clearly weren't partnerships. They were really just for extraction. The leader of Niger, you know, we said we don't call them coups, we call them revolutions. The leader of Niger, Abdurrahman Tiani, in 2023, 3 years ago, moved against the structure that had been in place that our ancestors have had to deal with for decades, for I'd say centuries, you know. He moved against that. And that was what led to that revolution that we saw. And as soon as he got in, as we've seen throughout the AES, he revoked Orano's license, for instance, the license that gave them access to the uranium that we know Niger has one of the world's largest deposits of uranium. And after Niger revoked their license, they actually, Orano went as far as threatening legal action. But we saw Niger stand its ground. And now Niger is drawing partners in multiple directions. Now we're hearing about oil wells. Like, this is music to my ears. Obviously we've had Russia on the table. We've had business dealings with China, but to hear a partnership with another African country, I absolutely love that introduction of Algeria, because now the standard Western narrative that has presented the AES as a Russia-aligned bloc, they've presented the AES as the region that expelled France and decided to turn eastward. Well, now we're seeing a partnership that's being formed right here on the continent. And this is proof that the AES believes in diversified partnerships on terms that it actually believes are more favorable. That's what we're about, terms that are favorable.
100%. And look, I'll just say that, and I said a little bit of it earlier, I think the most important thing is a little bit more sovereignty and control of your natural resources. And that's what's happening, right? So, and working with neighboring countries as well, who have some of the skill sets that you may not have in country as of yet. So it's, on one case, they're obviously partnering with Canada for the oil refinery, which, there may be some objections to that. At the end of the day, it's who you can partner with to get this done as soon as possible so that you can get into the game. And then on the other side, partnering with Algeria for that oil well to the north. Obviously, the permit was actually achieved back in 2005, and now turning that into something that is actually able to be drilled, I think is really interesting, and we're happy to hear that they are taking those steps to move forward. Okay. With that being said, we will move on to the next story in the Sahel, and that is really more around Russia and how they've been able to bring military and troops into the Sahel to kind of help combat against some of these insurgent groups. So I will play a little bit from a video from First Post, and then we'll give you some commentary on the other side.
Our next story is about Russia and the Sahel. Moscow is an integral partner for the Alliance of Sahel States. That's the alliance of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. For years, Russia has been supporting the Sahel's fight against extremism. It has been helping the three Sahel nations defend against terror groups like the Islamic State, West Africa Province, and the Jnim, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. But how is Russia managing to send support to the Sahel states? How does Moscow deploy troops and equipment to these West African battlegrounds? Well, a new report has revealed that Russia has created multiple air bridges to the Sahel, and it is using these routes to fortify its allies. The report is by the Center for Advanced Defense Studies, which goes by the acronym C4ADS. Now, it's a research organization that's based in Washington, D.C. It has spent months analyzing flights from Russia to figure out exactly what routes Moscow is using to transport troops and military equipment. The Center for Advanced Defense Studies looked at both Russian airlines and Russia-linked flights. It tracked them from the 1st of January 2025 to the 31st of July this year. Overall, it found 75 flights that originated in Russia landed in the Sahel, which could have been used to transport military aid. Now, the report by C4ADS says that Russia has been using 3 distinct routes, or bridges. One is used by Russian government planes, and the other 2 are used by commercial airlines with links to Russian mercenary companies. We'll start by looking at the route that's used by Russian government aircraft. C4ADS looked at the flight records of multiple airlines to unearth this air bridge.
We'll leave it there. If you want to watch the rest, you can head over to their channel to see more. But your thoughts on the routes that are used and the fact that a U.S. company has been tracking it and watching very closely these flights between Russia and the Sahel.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, their eyes are just on the Sahel because they know it's resource rich, as is the case with a lot of African countries. And that's, the first thing that jumps to your mind is, why are you so concerned? Why do you care so much, right? It's been established that Russia has proven to the Sahel that they're formidable partners. They've shown, even though you get reports in the media that focus on certain aspects and a lot of negativity. But again, if you're comparing, as I've said time and time again, if we're going to compare partnerships with France and the US, for instance, with partnerships that have happened with Russia or China, or, you can see a difference in how the countries have been treated. It seems to be more, there seems to be more respect. There seems to be more of a mutual benefit, partnerships that could actually benefit the people. There's a reason the AES partners with Russia. There's something that they've seen in terms of how they're being treated. There's a lot of dignity. France, Macron, even just recently in history, and when people say forget the past, well, even in recent history, when he's visited the continent, we see the way he addresses Africans and African leaders. So it's about partnership, who respects you and who is actually also looking out for your interest. And if you're able to respect the people of Africa, we can have conversations, but America really needs to just there's so much going on in America alone that they should really focus a lot of their attention on, that they're not focusing their attention on.
Absolutely. And we have another poll for everyone here. Do you think the Sahel should work so closely with Russia? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments or by engaging with the poll. So, look, the way I see it is this, they've put together this defense pact between the 3 Sahelian countries, right? And they've also put together different treaties and pacts with others, right? Burkina Faso has done so with Ghana. It seems that there were limited resources regionally, especially as far as advanced weapons are concerned. And they're dealing with a threat that has access to finances and advanced weapons from monies that have been coming through into these countries for years that have given them the ability to operate and continue to operate the way they do, right? These Al-Qaeda-backed groups, these groups that are backed by well-known international, what people call terrorist organizations. And I think that most people internationally would consider them terrorist organizations. They are backing these insurgent groups in these regions across the Sahel and northern parts of Nigeria, for example. And one of the things that we see when we look at some footage that they put out there is that they have, air defense missiles. They have all kinds of advanced weaponry that most of the local governments do not have access to. So they've turned to other folks for assistance. And in this case, Russia has been willing to be one of those who assist in not only with weapons, with knowledge, and with training, right? And so, they've, as you mentioned, Vladimir Putin meets with African heads of state. He doesn't just send a foreign minister. Sometimes he does, but he has met with them on many occasions. Whereas other times when they meet with the West, they don't meet with the head of state, right? They meet with, our version of the foreign minister, which would be the Secretary of State, right? Or when I say our, I mean the United States. The United States version of the foreign minister would be the Secretary of State. So a lot of times they'll meet with the Secretary of State and not meet with the head of state and the president. And so, I think that just leads folks to look to other options for people who are serious about assisting in their process. At least according to them, they feel like they're serious in assisting in helping them quell these dangerous insurgent groups. So with that, we're going to leave the poll up on the screen and give you guys the opportunity to vote on the poll. And while we'll play another video from First Post that speaks to Burkina Faso's deepening partnership with Putin's Russia. And I will mention that there was a congressperson recently who started to say that the Sahel should be sanctioned. And so that has begun. The idea of more sanctions have been imposed and introduced. I will say Mali has been under sanctions for years and has been able to survive these sanctions. And so so in that case, they've been able to find a way to avoid sanctions, or not avoid sanctions, but be under sanction and still operate the way they do. But there has been the idea to introduce more sanctions. And I think it's because of these tightening ties with Russia in particular. So with that, we'll play this video from First Post and we will have some commentary on the other side.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Ibrahim Traore wanted a break from the West and a new path towards sovereignty for Burkina Faso. Vladimir Putin's Russia wanted a stronger foothold in the heart of the Sahel. Now, the two nations are taking their relationship far beyond the battlefield. Reports confirm that the two sides are now gearing up for the first ever Russia-Burkina Faso Intergovernmental Commission in Moscow on the 16th of September. Moscow and Ouagadougou are set to bring governments and businesses to the table to discuss energy, technology, agriculture, and investment. The meeting may sound like routine diplomacy, but what's on the table is far more concrete, because this is about building a formal economic channel between the two countries and taking their relationship beyond security cooperation. Up until now, Russia's presence in Burkina Faso was defined almost entirely by security, with roughly 300 Russian Africa Corps soldiers stationed in the country. As local forces combat attacks from terrorist groups like Jnim and ISIS in the Sahel, the strategy is now shifting. Russia entered Burkina Faso through security, and now it wants to extend itself through the economy. And energy is at the center of it. Burkina Faso faces a major electricity shortfall. Reports estimate that only around 26% of the population has access to electricity. And that creates a major obstacle for a country seeking to industrialize.
All right, we will leave it there. Your thoughts, Gloria, on this?
Yeah, well, it's basically I'm just going to reference what I said previously, just the partnerships that we're seeing, and just when you treat African leaders or African countries with dignity and respect, then we can have conversations that have to be mutually beneficial. And yes, there's been security partnerships, but it's gone beyond that into economic partnerships, etc. And yeah, Russia is definitely an ally when you're talking about the Sahel.
There it is. I don't have much more to say than that.
So what Britain did in Nigeria, let me educate you.
It just reinforces what we were discussing. So moving on. Now there was a event that happened in the recent weeks where there was a Turning Point USA style Debate Me event, where you guys might be familiar with Turning Point. This is in the UK, where they tend to have these, they would set up a tent and have college students come up to a microphone and debate a particular topic. And through that process, you had many viral moments that, and one actually ending in the loss of life of Charlie Kirk in particular. It was an event like this. These events have become very popular for different right-wing organizations. So this organization in the UK did a very similar event. And here is how it unfolded with one of the Nigerian nationals who came to the event to step to the microphone. So we will play some video and give you some of our commentary on the other side.
Britain did in Nigeria, let me educate you. So what Britain did in Nigeria, let me educate you, you're ignorant of this, was to see that it was easy to control the people in the north by climbing on the back, by piggybacking on the oligarchy, the oligarchical system, the feudal system in Nigeria. The Igbos were like, at some point, no, our life was terrible by your oppressive regime and the rulership. We need to be free. And that was the crime. When the Igbos and the Yorubas joined forces to say that we needed independence, what did Britain do when they finally agreed to let go? They made those Northerners who rejected English education, English religion, English way of life, the overlord over these two who were civilized and educated, because it was easy to control the whole of Nigeria using the Islamic feudal system. And that is why we have the genocide, the massacre of Christians ongoing now in Nigeria. And what has Britain said about it?
Would you like us to come and colonize you again and sort it out?
To come and colonize us again, yeah. Sort it out.
Yeah, should we go over and colonize you and stop the horrific slaughter of Christians?
No, but that's what you have created.
Yeah, so should we sort it out?
When you talk about the benefit of the British Empire, it did as good as much as it did evil as well.
These
and it's quite rich for you to sit there thinking you can patronize someone as me that is more intelligent than you are.
Were these massacres happening when we were running your country?
I'm more intelligent and more educated than you, arrogant twat that is out there talking rubbish. You want to come and colonize Nigeria?
Wait. Yes, were these massacres happening?
If you're allowed, can you?
Were these massacres happening
as
under us?
As stupid as you
or
are,
did they happen when we left you to run your own country?
That's very stupid thing.
Were they happening
I thought I was going to have a civilized conversation.
When we were running your country,
maybe I listened to you.
Were these massacres
You want to come back and colonize Nigeria?
Were these massacres?
What a damn stupid question.
Were these
very
massacres
unintelligible
happening
question.
under us?
So what Britain?
All right. So obviously a very heated discussion. Obviously, Gloria, this is coming from your page. You posted this. Your thoughts on this particular exchange and why this is important, right? As we've been talking about, the Christmas Day bombings in northern Nigeria by the U.S. government, the conversation around Christian genocide, the conversation around, the Nigeria and U.S. working together to try to quell these insurgent groups. We had talked about whether or not they should be working with their neighboring countries as well and coordinate efforts. But yeah, so this was an interesting one. So Gloria, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, someone wrote the question triggered the Nigerian on my post. The question triggered the Nigerian spirit in him, and he sure did us proud. That comment got almost 1,000 likes, and that's why I'm laughing, because I mean it's not funny, obviously, but it's the responses was like Unc was not having it. Like, bro, this is not like I wrote in my caption. This is not 1961 when we, shortly after we gained independence. Prior to that we had been in your, at your mercy, as it were. Don't play. The man said, don't get it twisted. You're not farm, because if you had the knowledge that this man had, you wouldn't even be making rhetorics like this. And he was giving you an opportunity to learn, but you decided to weaponize something that is still impacting and hurting the continent of Africa. That can never be okay. And I'm just going to conclude by reading a comment that I wrote and pinned under this video. Regardless of where anyone stands on the claim that Christians in Nigeria are facing, an unalivement, the ease with which colonization is invoked by some descendants of colonizers needs to be studied. And this is part of why, when certain leaders come into power, it's concerning for me because of where the world ends up being. It's not to say that people don't have certain biases already or certain prejudices in their hearts, but there's a way the world gets so divided that conversations like this get normalized. It's a scary time.
Quick one, I do want to ask you, maybe it might be helpful for you to give some background on there was kind of a civil war at one point in time, and there was this question as to whether or not Nigeria, the borders that were drawn made sense because of the ethnic differences between those in the north and those in the south. It might be worth it for those who are not aware of that history to understand how that has something to do with some of what we're seeing here. Can we speak to that a little bit so that you can expand a little bit on what he was saying, because the clip was so short he didn't get a chance to get it out. But can we talk a little bit about that so people understand?
Yeah, and they kept interrupting him with those very demeaning comments, and they didn't have a chance to learn, and for all of us to learn. But when the British came into Nigeria, first of all, we were and I did a video on it called How Nigeria Was Formed. We were kingdoms just existing side by side. Obviously there were wars, some people were enslaving others. It was, that was actually the way it was done throughout the world anyway. And when the British came in the interest of, for their own economic and strategic interest, they forced what is now the northern part of Nigeria and what is now the southern part of Nigeria, they forced them together through an amalgamation that happened in 1914. When that happened, they were playing games of divide and conquer. So the North had a large land mass, or still has a large land mass, and they would do things, favor them, do what we call indirect rule, where they would have the emirs and the kings, lead the people. And so they were doing that with the North and basically pacifying them. And even to an extent, they weren't prioritizing things like education over there. And they would, listen to them, basically just doing things where you're planting seeds, and before you know it, there are people in the South that are having, reservations, etc. You just basically force people with different ideologies, cultures, interests, you force them together. So there's been tension throughout. And then all that escalated or led to the civil war that happened between 1967 and 1970. It's a long story. I don't think we have enough time to go into it, but the bottom line is that there's been so much tension. The first election of Nigeria, which happened, I think right before independence of 1960, reportedly, and there's been evidence, there's documentation to prove this, was rigged. And it was the British people who conducted it, and they rigged it to favor the North. So you can see so that's part of what he was saying. It's a very long history. This is what has led to all this tension we're having now, and all these suspicions of our Christians being targeted and Muslims. It's just never been favorable. And then to have British people sit there, make comments like that is not only ironic, but actually deeply disturbing.
Well put. I got nothing else to add. So two other things that we wanted to cover today, but we did not have the opportunity to. One is the tensions between Ethiopia and Egypt rising because there is a plan in Ethiopia to build more Nile dams, and this has a negative impact downstream on Egypt. The Nile runs north. Like the flow of it runs north, which is confusing, I know, to many people, because you would just presume it runs south for whatever reason, but it does run north. And so countries upstream of Egypt are creating dams for power and other things, right? Because that water is a source of power and other things within those countries. And so that is causing challenges downstream, of course, for Egypt. And so this has been a point of contention over the last few years. And so there is some tension there. And then lastly, Angelique Kidjo makes history as the first Black African honored on Hollywood Walk of Fame. They definitely say first Black African because others who are of Dutch descent have gotten stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame who are not Black Africans. Anything you want to add to that last story? Because I know Angelique has a special place in your heart. So before we go, I want you to have an opportunity to speak to that.
I just love Angelique. And, you know, people will say, oh, well, we don't care. We don't want their validation. We don't need the Grammys honors. We don't need, etc. But, you know, at the end of the day, this woman has achieved. She's done so much, put Africa in the spotlight and just stayed true to herself. I love just seeing her, you know, in her own authentic self. Angelique is was the same yesterday. She's still the same today. I absolutely adore her. Congratulations, Angelique.
Congratulations to her. And with that, we want to thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to us both on YouTube. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you're notified every time a new video comes out. Make sure you like and comment on this video if you haven't already. Helps the algorithm show this to more people. If you know anybody who is interested in the news of the day in Africa, make sure you share this with them. And also follow us across all other platforms. So you can follow Gloria at The Gloria Ayo and at Diaspora Station. And you can follow me at Authentic African. And so with that, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys all on the next video. Bye, guys.